Welcome to In the Balance, the podcast to help you build your dream team of experts to make your financial goals a reality.
Well, the more I hear about KHI partners, the more I'm starting to understand it is a dream team of experts. Welcome to In the Balance. I'm Phil Tarrant, your co-host, joining the studio. Back, my co-host, Munzurul Khan.
Thank you.
First episode for 2025.
Indeed. Look forward to it.
Yeah. Did you have a good break, mate?
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was fantastic. A bit of time with the kids and Peruvian and sort of back into it now.
So you actually had a holiday?
I did have a holiday.
Did you take your laptop with you?
I did take my laptop with me. But it was a good bit of time.
Did you do a little bit of work every day just to keep that fix sorted out?
No, in December is the only time that I sort of get those 3 weeks off. And what I love with those sort of 3 weeks is to unwind and sort of actively slow down and do some of the things that I always wanted to do. And it's amazing that, you know, as an entrepreneur, we always sort of think. And when you sort of slow down, you let the mind flow. Very often there's some wonderful ideas sort of comes in. So I look forward to Christmas always, yeah.
Yeah, well, welcome back. So 2025 for KHI is going to be a big year?
There's a lot of things which we're planning, and technology is right at the front.
Yeah, okay, well, it's good. And, technology will be a great way for delivering better client services or seeking productivity and all that sort of bean counter stuff that accountants do.
That's right.
I'm sure you're right across it and pumped. But, we're now into, the second year of running this is obviously, it's only sort of six episodes in, but 2024, 25 in the balance. And this is mine and Munzurul's attempt to try and bring a narrative which sort of is the common thread of most property investors, and this is very much their buying, their accounting, their tax, their business life, their financial advice, their financial planning, all in sundry, and the relevant professionals that help with them. So we're trying to sort of weave that narrative of how all these things come together, and it's pretty clear from the guests that we've had in the podcast so far, Munzurul, that it is a team effort. Absolutely.
Yeah, and love it, Phil. We're being very, very blessed because we started with Trevor and myself as being the founding partners. Then we went into the accountants, we went into the financial planners, we went into the mortgage brokers, and then we've got the lawyers today. We
do have lawyers today, and I'm always a bit nervous sitting around with lawyers. I'm very comfortable sitting around with lawyers. It's okay. I have a lot of experience working with lawyers and sometimes against lawyers. It's all good fun. It can be a contact sport, and the best lawyers I know, they don't shy away from a fight. But we want to sort of have a discussion today about the very important role of lawyers and the work that lawyers do as part of this sort of holistic wealth building strategy. And obviously the common thread of our discussions is property is the asset class which most people are dialed into as a vehicle for driving wealth. And, there's been some criticism to you about maybe needing to diversify a little bit more and know a little bit about your property portfolio. And we've had some fun over previous podcasts, particularly with financial advisors as part of the KHI network who may be trying to get you to diversify a little bit more. And diversification is important. I know you are diversified, but you do have property running through your veins. You're going to do more buying personally this year? You never stop?
Look, I think 2025 would be a very interesting year. You and I, we spoke a number of times in terms of the interest rate and where is the interest rate. And it's amazing because that whole sort of the prediction, so to speak, with the interest rate, we change a number of times, right? And every time when we see the inflation data, we sort of say, oh, is it a bit of butterfly again effect? And then you've got the Donald Trump sort of coming in. But however way we sort of say it is that we've got the election year coming in and the CPI is coming in end of January. So I think February would be very interesting to see whether we have that first cut. But whether we have February, whether we have April, May, is that this is the year of the interest rate reduction. And that means lots of activities in the property world.
Yeah, I would say probably the most relevant theme which will shape and dictate property markets and therefore investment decision making will be how the government's many different people, but how the government will shape and influence policy decision making and how that will translate into regulation or the market in general. So we have a federal election coming up. Who knows where that'll swing? If you sort of spoke about it a year ago, everyone would have said that Labor's a shoe-in. And I think it's going to be absolutely contested on property and property policies this upcoming election. But then You have a change in government, sort of literally only a week and a half away in the US with Donald Trump coming in. What's that going to do to markets? Government intervention in particularly state level and a local planning level is going to shape housing affordability and developments and everything. It's going to be a year of government intervention in property, and it's all going to be linked in with the federal election. But to your point, who knows what's going to happen in February? ANZ still reckons there's going to be a rate cut.
That's
in
right.
February. I think NAB is still saying there's going to be 3 rate cuts this year. I don't know if I certainly don't subscribe into the February rate cut.
I think there's a number of things, right? I mean, number one is that we need to see the inflation data end of January, which is the December inflation, right? That's number one. Number two is that we look back into the budget deficiency that we all sort of estimated or sort of the budget for this year is that that deficiency has dropped quite a bit because of with all the surplus tax sort of came in. And the tax sort of comes in on the later half of the year more as opposed to the first half. So we've got still a big chunk of cash to come in. So the question comes in is that what is the government going to do with all of those cash, right? I mean, is the budget going to be surplus? It may still be deficient, but it would be a lot less than what we sort of estimated, right? And that bit of the proposed level of the spending, so to speak, that also has an impact on inflation, right? And on the other side, you sort of say that, well, how do you balance in between 2 or 3? So last year we spoke that there were so many noises. There is still a bit of noise, but I think it's getting more and more clear. And I hear your point whether February would be there, but at the same time I sort of say, well, if we bring in the election, and you bring in the RBA and some of the board members and how the board members is being appointed, you look into all of those, and then one sort of says, well, I would not be surprised if February happens.
Maybe, but property's become certainly politicised, if not weaponised, across all areas of government Australia at a state, local and at a federal level. It's absolutely going to dominate. Probably at least it's going to be a tale of 2 halves. I think you're going to have this first half of the year, which is going to be dominated by this, and the second half of the year, which will be a consequence of what happens in the first half of the year. But everyone has asked me. You saw CPI numbers come out, a couple of days ago. Everyone gets absorbed and obsessed with trying to predict what does it all mean. One thing I say to property investors is that if the Reserve Bank of Australia, and I'd like your view on this, if the Reserve Bank of Australia chooses to cut rates for whatever reason, whether it's in February, whether it's in April or May, whenever it is, pre-election, post-election, it's not a definite guarantee that your mortgages are going to get cheaper immediately.
True.
A lot of people think that they'll just pass on that, and you wait and watch and see. It's going to be who blinks first. I'm not expecting the majors to pass on those rates easily, and if they do, you're going to have to fight kicking and screaming to get your loans repriced with your lenders or be set to refinance. And that's what that's the counsel I'm giving people right now.
Well, there's a number of incentive, and you would see a typical sort of a trick, so to speak, what the banks do is that when the RBA sort of reduces, bank takes about a week to 2 weeks before they sort of pass, if they pass anything. And that sort of a 7 days, 10 days makes a huge difference in terms of their bottom line. So we set that aside, number one. Number two is that...
That's a cynical view, but it's true.
It is true, unfortunately. And number two is that the bank doesn't need to pass all of those. And historically, they haven't always passed all of those, right? So I hear your view. In one side is that whether the bank is going to do it, right? But on the other side, I also say is that there is a bit of competition in the market at the moment in terms of the market share and it's in between that balance of the power, so to speak, is that which side sort of develops a bit. Then we go back to the investor, and 2 points which we say to the investor. Point number one is that I think there would be a psychological impact in the sense that whatever the interest rate drop, whether it's 0.25, whether we get 0.15, whether we get 0.1, I think that tick is not so much the quantum, but it's the psychology that we have gone through that all that increase and stagnation, so to speak. From here on, the future is perhaps it's a little bit lower as long as the inflation is being managed. And I think that psychology has a big impact. And the last comment I say is that as an investor's point of view, in a way, all those things are interesting, but all of those things are a bit academic. And academic in the sense that how long are we investing? Are we investing for the immediate 6 months, 12 months?
Yeah.
It's the long-term investment. And in the long-term investment, it all balances out, right?
It does. It always, in the balance, it always balances out. But a lot of people get absorbed or obsessed by their decision-making around the immediacy of CPI data or wage inflation or whatever it is, right? And we're talking about long-term investing through property, and the consequence of, 10 basis points cut today, if that's going to be the thing that shapes and influences your buying or your hold strategy in property, you're probably doing something wrong.
To give it just a brief example, I mean, literally today I was speaking to a client of mine, and the client of mine was sort of asking the question that Munzurul, is Western Australia sort of has gone through the boom, and sort of it's sort of at the end of that cycle. Is it time for me to sell away some of this property, cash it out, use that cash, go back to Victoria, all the rest of it? And my first answer is that I'm not a financial planner, so I can't answer any of those. However, then I sort of look back and I sort of say that, well, you've got to quantify this, that there is a buying cost, there is a selling cost, there is a capital gain tax, right? And about timing the market, I mean, that's hard, right, in terms of timing the market. And what is the return in the longer period of time with the compounding? So the question I was asking to the gentleman is that at the moment you sort of are making this decision or potentially making this decision because you can't borrow. You've reached into a borrowing limit. But as soon as the interest rate drop, the borrowing limits increases. As soon as your rental income increases, the borrowing level increases. So sometimes it's that patience and it's that sort of the longer term view, as opposed to just looking into immediately right now, I can't borrow anymore. Can I make this drastic decision? Do we need to make this drastic decision, or we play the long-term game?
Yeah, what you're talking about is strategic patience, right? Which most property investors need to have at some point in time, because every investor I know always hits some sort of cap at some point until something else happens. Either you make more money, or you get more dividends, or you start a new business, or you get a side hustle, or someone gets a job. Someone's got to change in order to influence a change in behaviour and maybe investing strategy. So a lot of that happens. So it's got to be the first 6 months of the year and the second 6 months of the year. There needs to be election before May. It's probably going to happen. They need 6 weeks in order to have an election campaign. So I'd be expecting an announcement sort of in March around when the election is going to be taking place. And no doubt the government's hoping that the Reserve Bank gets together a couple of times, at least once before then, and maybe they do make that cut. But a lot of it is, to your point, sentiment driven.
Yes,
it's absolutely sentiment driven.
That's why I think the February is more of those reasons as opposed to pure science.
Yeah.
If I were to look through the pure science, I would probably say whether it's February or May. But just bringing in that election, the February seems to be still in a bit of contest.
Yeah. Anyway, what do you think? February? I'm going to say, I'll put on record, it won't be. You're not going to get a rate cut in February.
I think there is a chance in February.
Okay.
I think, and I could be wrong. I could be very well wrong. I could absolutely be very well wrong.
You're a betting man, Munzurul?
No. Always lose at betting.
Yeah.
Always lose at betting.
Anyway, so that's a bit of a sense for what's going on. But so we've spoken with brokers, we've spoken with from KHI, financial advisors. We're going to speak to some insurers soon. And I've actually just taken a new policy with for one of my properties with your insurance business. So,
right. Okay,
yeah,
lovely.
There you go. Yeah,
Okay.
KHI Insurance, is that what it's called?
KHI Insurance,
yeah.
Rochelle.
Which was pretty cool. We've spoken to the accountants, obviously, as well. So lawyers, are lawyers at the front end of most property investment decision making, or are they normally sweeping behind and cleaning everything up, Munz?
No, look, they should not be, right? And very often our lawyers sort of do this. It's that sort of the cleaning act, but they shouldn't be, because I think the right level of the property-oriented lawyer has got so much value proposition and so much that one can contribute here.
Yeah. So Sandy Kaur and Michael Elias join us in the studio from KHI. Is KHI Legal? Is that what
That's
we call
right.
it? Yeah,
That's
KHI
right.
Legal.
So we've got KHI
Lawyers,
Legal
don't hold it against them. Welcome, gang. Sandy, how you going?
Thanks, Will. Good, thank you.
Yeah. So why law?
Well, I think it was one of those things, just growing up in high school, legal studies, one of my core subjects, and learning everything. It was probably one of the subjects I enjoyed the most.
Okay.
That and economics. And I think at uni, naturally, just did a double degree, Bachelor of Commerce, majoring economics, and a Bachelor of Laws.
Classic degree. Good. Yeah, it must be beneficial today when you sort of think about the firm that you've found yourself in with KHI, because it's very much driven towards sort of wealth creation. Wealth creation doesn't happen in a bubble. It happens within, all the shifting sands of the wider economy, and, legal bit's pretty important as well.
That's right. So with KHI Partners, obviously, as you know, it's very property focused. We've got a lot of clients as property investors, whether that be, from first home buyers all the way to seasoned property investors. And as a property lawyer, my job is, to sort of help them, guide them through the process. Now, when you think of property law, what probably comes up to your mind is the first thing is conveyancing. That, all right, I found a property. You just need to engage someone now to sort of do the bits and pieces of legal work and get through the line and have the title transferred. But it's actually a lot more than that. There's a lot of things that we do behind the scenes. We need to sort of be proactive, talk to the client, see what they're trying to do and achieve, and make sure that we look at all the details to make sure there's no conflict, no sort of, towards the end of the deal when settlement comes, there's no sort of surprises or any costs that, are not expected.
So let's deal with that first point, law versus conveyancing. So a lawyer can be a conveyancer, but a conveyancer might not necessarily be a lawyer.
Yeah, so it does vary across state by state in Australia. So in some states, licensed conveyancers are recognised, while in other states they aren't. Let's take, for example, New South Wales. Licensed conveyancers can also practice conveyancing. They can help through a property transaction. But one thing conveyancers don't generally do is they don't have the legal background in terms of if anything goes wrong. If there's a dispute that arises, a conveyancer cannot generally take you through the process or guide you in terms of providing legal advice as to what your next steps would be in terms of a dispute. So at that instance, if anything as such happens, you'd have to approach a lawyer in any case.
Okay.
But if you've got a property lawyer by your side assisting you throughout the conveyance, they'd be able to pick up those things and obviously guide you towards the end and try to resolve that with you.
Okay, so I'll introduce Michael in a moment, but just to stick on this thread, how often does it go wrong?
Look, I think that's a good question, Phil. Now, if you don't know the process from the beginning, you're not explained the key terms and conditions, and you don't know what you're going into, it's a contract at the end of the day, then it's likely things may go not as unplanned. So in that instance, it can happen very often. But when you've got a lawyer assisting you, they walk you through the terms and conditions, you're able to negotiate the contract, then you're pretty much at the end of the day trying to make sure nothing goes wrong. And I think about 80 or 90% of the time, yes, contract properties, they do settle on time and everything goes smoothly, but then you do have that 10, 20% of matters that do have, things that arise unexpectedly.
I'd say that's probably pretty right. If I look at my portfolio, 8 out of 10 transactions are pretty smooth. 2 out of 10, sometimes there's hiccups or problems or issues, and there's consequence around it. So, for most straightforward property transactions, a conveyancer should be able to do it for you. If I'm just thinking sort of real straightforward type things.
Look, conveyancers can help you, but the thing is that with a lawyer, especially being a seasoned property investor, if you go to a conveyancer, they generally have a process which they'll follow. They'll send you all the correspondence. They'll give you all the information. But where it sort of differs, where I see my clients, is when they're seasoned property investors, I sort of understand, their portfolio, their risk tolerance, what they need to know. I wouldn't be explaining them everything from start. If I've dealt with them for 10 property purchases, they don't need to understand what a cooling off period is and all that in detail. So I'll be looking at the main points, seeing what's of interest to them and what may be impacting them in their property purchase, and go straight to that point.
Did you specialise in property law at uni? Did you do a particular discipline in it, or you sort of fell into property law?
I did do a property law unit, and then I've been in property law for over 8 years now.
Okay. And you're also a property investor. Is that a requirement for everyone at KHI?
Yeah, not necessarily a requirement, but see,
it's encouraged, obviously.
The comment which came into myself is that while you were speaking about the conveyancing and the lawyer side of it, right? If we look through the cost differences, that there is a nominal cost, right? And then one says that in perspective of having a large purchase or a large sale, is that it's that quality, is that assurance, is that, with all due respect, is that level of the skills that its quality comes in with that bit of the price, right?
Yeah, it's pretty important. But property law is so much more than just conveyancing of a contract. Absolutely. And a lot of it is around sort of structures and deeds and trusts and all that sort of stuff. And you've got resi and you've got commercial. Michael, Elias, you do a lot of commercial stuff, do you? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, Sandy and I's work crossover. I definitely do a lot of residential. I do a lot of commercial as well, both in New South Wales and in Queensland. But I suppose the main difference, touching point, is I see myself as sort of more of a project manager. For these people purchasing property. They just want to know that there's someone looking after them throughout the whole process. And I know that you just asked Sandy a question about how often do things go wrong? I look at that question and say, it can be a lot more than 8 out of 10, And the reason why I say that is because, simply sending correspondence at the wrong time can create a problem.
Yeah.
Right. Telling them the shortfall amount required to be paid in a certain account, we can be restricted by the actual banking limits. So, if we don't tell them in enough detail and enough time, giving them enough space to get their affairs in order, then we can themselves create a problem for them.
It's a bit of a loaded question, like how often does it go wrong? If I was answering that question, I was a lawyer, I'd say if you use a good lawyer, it typically doesn't go wrong.
Yep.
Where I see it going wrong can be really simple stuff. I've seen some real clangers in property where people misspelling, entities wrong on contracts and, putting the wrong amounts on contracts and people not noticing, just signing them and they're it's $20, $30, $50, $100,000 difference from what was negotiated. Like that's going wrong and that happens, right?
Yep.
And a bad lawyer or conveyancer, the propensity of stuff going wrong is higher.
Yeah, no, look, and absolutely, and that was the exact example I was going to tell you, right? So we've actually just recently finished the conveyancing, and it was a commercial one in nature, and we're acting for the seller. So in this case, we've got everything in order, we've ordered all the certificates, we've served them correctly, we've done everything that we need to do, and albeit behold, the purchaser comes in and says we're not ready for settlement. Our valuations come back lower than expected. So we've just waited for 3.5 months for them to redo their finance applications and whatnot, and charge them about 70 or 80 grand worth of interest.
Are they going to pay it?
Well, they have paid it. So
really, they actually pay the interest.
I feel like they had to pay. They really had no choice.
Yeah.
And plus, they've got stamp duty implications. When it goes over the 3-month period, they'll be paying interest on that. The notice to complete costs that we've had to issue, to get them in order. So there's a lot of things that we do proactively rather than reactively to ensure that, our clients are protected from.
That sounds like a right old mess, that. Yeah.
Look, it's a mess, but again, this is where we manage. This is where we try to explain to the client the situations, their options, and then give them the ability to give them the informed decision.
And Michael, in terms of the name of the contract, as Phil was sort of saying, right, even that name by itself can be complex. So if we look through into the family trust as an example, that are you doing that on ABC Proprietary Limited or ABC Proprietary Limited as trustee for XYZ Family Trust? When we look into the self-managed super fund as an example, that it needs to be in the right name.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's where things go really wrong with lawyers, where a lot of lawyers aren't comfortable around self-managed super fund sort of lending, and because you've got to set up bear trusts and all this sort of stuff, what goes in a contract, I've spoken to a lot of lawyers and they don't know. They go, I have no idea. And they put the wrong name on it.
And challenge, Phil, what we have is that a stamp duty is a state tax, right? So each state has got a slightly different ways in terms of all the stamp duty. And in some circumstances is that if we change the name, there is a potential double stamp duty as well.
Yeah, so definitely that's one of the problems that goes wrong, and that's what we prevent. So the great thing about coming to a property lawyer, someone that is property orientated, is that we do the bare trust for you. We'll tell you which name to put in the contract based on where you're purchasing, in which state, because every state is different. We'll tell you where or how the bare trust needs to be signed relative to the contract so that you do prevent it. So give you a classic example of 2 states that we practice in. In New South Wales, the bare trust needs to be signed and dated after the date of the contract, whereas in Queensland, it's the other way around. So those simple sort of tips and tricks, I suppose, can really, 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 make a matter go pear-shaped.
So both of you guys can practice in Queensland and New South Wales?
Yeah. Yes. Yep. The other thing I also see, just on Michael's point there, is because when one's buying a property, whether that be through their buyer's agent or them engaging with the agent directly, there's always seems to be a time constraint that they need to sign the contract exchange. And during that time, one thing they do is they either just put their individual name or put in, maybe perhaps their superannuation fund name as opposed to the corporate trustee. And yes, that does cause a problem later on down the track, because not only is there double stamp duty implications, if the other side does agree to do a rescission and re-exchange of contract, that always comes with a cost and also a time delay. So you've entered into the contract, you've got your due diligence date, you've got either the cooling off period coming up, your pest and building or finance clause, yet you're trying to have your lawyers engage in changing the name on the contract, which again takes a couple of days.
Yeah, it doesn't. And this is where having sort of knocked around a little bit with lawyers in many different guises, there's art and science in law. The law is the law, and the interpretation of it. There's a bit of art in that, but it's at the point of negotiation where you really want a good lawyer on your side. Like if and when mistakes happen, and often mistakes happen, if there's good rapport between your lawyers, you can normally get things sorted out without too much onerous sort of rescissions of contracts. And sometimes you can just go, okay, let's just rip it up and do it again. Whereas if there's friction in relationships, often you get stuck, and that's when it gets really litigious. And to my point, now, lawyers typically won't back away from the fight, but the best lawyers I know are hugely consultative and they're outcomes orientated. Yep. And not all lawyers are created equal.
Yep.
That's right. I think it's all about mutual understanding with your colleagues in the legal profession. You really need to have that sort of marriage to make sure that you're acting in the client's best interest and what's the best possible way, moving forward to negotiate and resolve the issue, as opposed to, creating more issues and spending more time on the matter.
So what sort of legal work do you most like doing, Sandy?
So
probably not conveyancing. Is it that? Because what I want to get to is the breadth of property law. So it's just not sales contracts on a property, and some of them are a bit more sophisticated. Maybe it's inside SMSF, but I think a lot of it's probably more around legal documentation of more sophisticated relationships or arrangements inside of property, and it can get pretty sophisticated.
That's right, yes. So what generally I do, Phil, we've got a team that does the conveyancing. I oversee that. But in terms of legal documents, when you've got either, a couple of parties to a contract, they've come together to either do a joint venture, whether that be a development or another sort of venture together, they do need some sort of contract in place or agreement to make sure that they understand what their roles and responsibilities are. That could either be, a shareholders agreement if they're going down that path, or a unit holders agreement, or even a joint venture agreement, depending on what sort of matter we're looking at. And that document needs to define each party's roles and responsibilities. It needs to tell you what the exit strategy would be if one party is not able to go until the end. So just understanding that, and of course, who's going to be putting in how much money, or where the funds are going to be distributed, and how that profit share is going to be working as well. That's always important because, yes, parties do come together, obviously, with a great idea, with a project in mind to move forward. But where I see things go wrong is where they've either relied on verbal agreements, their communication hasn't been noted or documented, and later on when there's a problem that arises, there's no sort of exit and there's disputes that arise.
Yeah, a lot of people think they shy away from creating legal agreements because they feel as though it creates friction. And why are we talking about stuff when there's not a problem right now? The important thing with legal agreements is that you only need it when things go wrong. But there's another aspect of that also. It can actually give you the cadence or the rules of engagement to help you ensure that things go right. And if you can talk about these things at the front end, know everyone's sort of contribution, their participation, typically you can shape a better outcome for everyone. And you go, okay, we've discussed that, we've worked it out, we've debated it, we can put that in the bottom of a drawer. Hopefully we never need that agreement, they pull it out when things go wrong. But with property, because typically there's a lot of money involved, when things go wrong, they can get pretty fractured quickly. And no doubt you see it all the time. What do you got to get absolutely right in a legal agreement if you're doing sort of property-related transactions, would you say?
Yes. So in a legal agreement, I think the key thing is to make sure everyone understands their roles and responsibilities and how much the profit share and the exit strategy would work if one party is to exit. What I see often is now disputes arise. They can arise in any case, but the key question is, if a dispute arises, how do you resolve that efficiently and effectively? Yeah. And in the absence of a legal document, unfortunately, it's not efficient or effectively going to resolve. You're going to spend a lot of time, money and effort, and at the end of the day, everyone's just going to be exhausted. So the key things is have a clear idea of what your goals are, and with that, all the clauses in a legal agreement that would be there in terms of what needs to happen, when it needs to happen, and what happens if something goes wrong.
And how do you measure your success around your professional contribution to these type of things? Because a lot of the work you do is for contingency purposes. So if it never gets used, it's really hard to measure whether or not it's been done well. Something not happening for lawyers is typically a really good outcome. So how do you sort of, check in after every day and go, today's been a good day because I've done blah, blah, blah? Like, what's your frame of reference with that?
Yeah, look, I think it's more so just making sure the clients understand and they've got that peace of mind, knowing that they're protected. My client has entered into an agreement, but if something does go wrong, they would be protected. Yes, it'd be great if that agreement never needs to be used. It can just sit in the drawer and their project's completed. It's all done. But it's always just making sure that they're protected, because those sort of things are very unforeseen. You don't know when things are going to go wrong.
Yeah.
So I think having that peace of mind for me is critical for my client.
I think, Sandy, to a great extent, it's all about listening to the clients, right? And when we speak about this sort of contract can be very, very, very complex, and contract could be very standard, right? And all of those has got a cost involved, and all of those has got your time involvement, right? So it's very often listening to the client, what is important to them, number one. And number two is to explore to them of all the different possibilities, but also at the same time having that commerciality and the balance behind it. It's not to overdo it, but we still do it enough what is required. So to give you one example, right, is that when Trevor and I, when we, right at the beginning, that when we had our first I said to Trevor, as being the founding partner, I said that we need to have a contract. And Trevor and I, we know each other 25 years. And Trevor says, mate, the day we have to look into the contract is the day we don't have a contract, right? Which I agree with him. But I said, Trevor, it's not also just you and me as the contract. Let's use this example. Let's say that if I'm not here, unless there is a contract between you and me, Trevor, my lawyers, my estate planning lawyers would be coming in, and in the absence of a contract, they would be coming in saying that, well, you've got equal ownership on this particular business, and from our perspective is that we wish those shares to be sold so we can get that bit of the funding. Here is the time frame, right? Which may or may not be the best thing from Trevor's point of view at that stage, which also may or may not be the best thing from my point of view if I were around. But the fact that there was no contract means that there was no explicit instruction from my end, means that the lawyers are doing the very best that they can in absence of having a clear direction from our point of view. So I think it's very often listening, and very often that documenting this as we listen. And then in the longer period of time, hopefully we never have to open that.
And that's good. And, the point around all lawyers are created differently, and some of them is the skill and sophistication and the softer skills, but also not all lawyers are super commercial. I don't know, you probably see it as well, where they can interpret the law and it's black and white, but a really commercially orientated lawyer can be a huge asset as part of any property sort of acquisition or sale or investment type thing. You must see that a lot, Michael.
I do, and I suppose the way that you've brought this question, I suppose, is great flow-on effect, right? We've started with discussing, the property-orientated lawyer versus the conveyancer and whether you can do it, but it really depends on where you are in your journey, right? When you start, you could possibly go to the conveyancer. You're buying a property, mum and dad, client, your personal name. There's not much tricks that are going to go wrong. And then as you move in your journey, you move towards the more commercial orientated structures, and then obviously commercial orientated, lending versus orientated commercial, property. So we see it a lot. There are people, again, better than others, but that's the way that this landscape works. There are a lot of good commercial lawyers, but I would, definitely suggest that if you've got a commercial matter, you go to a commercial lawyer.
Yeah.
There's no point in getting a...
Michael, as an example, is that one of the questions that I sort of get at times, right, is that the trust deed that we do, and this trust deed that we do on the discretionary trust, right, there's a whole lot of this internet-based trust deed that if you just type it in and you get all those being done, right, and they're very inexpensive and you get that in there, right, but the question comes in that who actually goes around and reads that trust deed? Does every property investor, they actually read that trust deed? So from my point of view as a property investor, I would much rather go to a lawyer, get it done in the proper way, even with the fact that it's just slightly more in terms of the cost side of it, knowing that this trust is going to have those multi-million dollar properties over a period of time. People don't read them on a day in, day out basis, right? That's where the quality comes in.
You normally just get a folder and it sits on a shelf somewhere and you never look at it. But for me, I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to this sort of stuff. The way I frame property law or law inside of real estate investment is that you've got more tactical applications law, then you've got more strategic applications law.
Yeah.
And the tactical application laws might be negotiating a contract, a conveyancing contract for the execution of a sale. And I would say that even I've been in transactions on a buyer side where on the seller side, their lawyer or conveyancer is absolutely miserable. Like it turns it into a horrible experience if you're not dealing with professionals. It's just a nightmare. When you've got a good team and they've got a less than good team, it's a horrible thing. But that's really tactical. The strategic stuff is around long-term asset wealth creation and then the building blocks of that. And for property investors, a lot of them would be how you choose to hold your properties and really good advice around that. Accountants can give good advice from a taxation point of view, but lawyers can actually give really good advice from a point of view of asset protection or estate planning and all that sort of stuff. That's real strategic stuff where you need a good lawyer. So you guys would do pretty much everything in relation to that. You do trust deeds. You do I don't know.
Yep.
Are you actually getting calls from mum and dads now saying I want to give some money to my parents for a equity release or something? I want a legal contract around it. Like you got to do this sort of thing.
You get those funny calls here and there. They've heard something on the internet. They've read they've gone into Dr. Google and he's told them everything that they need to do to create wealth and get to the next stage. But without, I suppose, sitting down with your accountant, with your financial planners, with your mortgage broker, with your lawyer, having a multifaceted approach, seeing a lens from every single professional and then coming up with a creative solution. It's difficult to say a one size fits all program. So, the best way that I think of it is, a client will come into Munzurul. Munzurul will sit down with them, listen to them, give them obviously an obligation-free meeting to understand what they are. Again, coming back to the listening approach, he'll find out, how he can assist, where KHI in as a group can assist, not whether it just be legal, but from anyone else or any professional. And then, we have their introduction. We sit down together, we calculate, we strategize, and then we put forward and implement a strategy for that. So, in terms of the commercial aspect of things, if you've got a sale, if you've got a purchase, we'll sit down, we'll discuss all the key things, all the things to think about, whether it be the lease, the remaining time of the lease, your employment, your employees, how they're going to be transferred, what sort of sick leave they've still got, the GST, the capital gains aspects of things. So there are a lot of things to consider. And again, it comes back to your point. It makes life a lot easier when both the seller and the purchaser have good legal teams that are, I suppose, competent, for lack of a better word.
Property can be really stressful and emotional for a lot of people. And you do a lot of it, it gets a bit sort of, just standardised. You don't really get sort of too caught up in it. But for most people, it's probably a big deal. So to actually have confidence and trust that the person acting on your behalf is putting you in the best position is absolutely critical. And, lawyers in many ways are the often forgotten sort of professional when it comes to property transactions. That they don't have the sort of flamboyant public persona of what you have as some of the buyers agents out there, or celebrity accountants, or mortgage brokers. Lawyers typically just operate and quite happy in the shadows, right? So it's good to actually be able to have a discussion around the very important work that they do, and maybe expanding people's consciousness towards how a lawyer is a critical aspect of any sort of wealth creating sort of strategy. But you also need to build continuity with your legal team, is what I would say. And that being, I've had it because I've used your firm to set up a number of trusts for me, and I can't remember when it was some time ago now, but regulation or legislation changes, and then all your trust deeds need updating. And I think it was something around foreign investment or something. There was something recently.
So a number of things, right? So when you set up a trust, and this is where, Michael, you sort of also comment as well, that when we set up a trust, when we set up a trustee company, there's many things comes in, right, in terms of your asset protection point of view. Is that who should be the director? Should it be just him? Should it be her? Should it be both as being the co-director as such? It all has a whole bunch of implication in terms of both your risk, even all the way to estate planning side of it, yeah? Then we look into the shareholder. Who should be the shareholder on the trustee company? We look into the appointor, and we sort of say that appointor is sort of the fundamental, right? So who should be the appointor? Should it be one appointer? Should it be a co-appointer? Do we have this concept called alternate appointer? Should it be an alternate appointer? then we go deeper into it, and we sort of say that, well, the beneficiaries, who are the definition of the beneficiaries on the trust, who are the primary beneficiaries, who are the secondary beneficiaries, what are the things that we bring in? And then we go back and say that the rules change all the time. And then a good lawyer is the lawyer who proactively goes back and says that it changed. Or that foreign beneficiaries change, which came in a few years now, is a good example, right? Unless you go back and were to make those changes at that point of time, saying that the foreign beneficiaries are excluded, there would be a significant level of additional tax. And Michael, at that stage, Sandy, we went back with thousands of trustees, and every one of them we proactively went back and we changed all of those. So you're right.
You need it. And my experience with lawyers or the law, you need a competent and capable lawyer or legal team to actually understand the law. But the best way, a lot of people, if you're not comfortable, if you're not a lawyer and you're not comfortable dealing with lawyers, often you think you need to be led. My recommendation to people is that the best way to get the best from your lawyer is to help lead them. You've got to actually be very specific and precise with what you want. You've got to give them really good instructions, expecting them to just say, okay, here you go, you need this, and don't be connected with it. You've got to be really specific. And sometimes lawyers don't like to be led too much. It's funny. But you need to, it's like a relationship of trust, right? You need to actually be able to say to him, I want you to do this. This is it in theory. I need you to make it legal. That's what I've always found the best way to deal with lawyers. I don't know what you guys think. You probably like good client-connected engagement, I would imagine.
That's right. Look, I think the more information we can get from the client, the better we can help them. We can sort of provide them the tailored legal advice. We understand what they're after and how we can sort of help them achieve that goal of theirs. So I think, when we're able to have a meeting with the client, it's best that they're very open with us. They give us all the details up front, because once we start sort of helping them throughout the matter and then we get a couple of surprises here and there, then it does sort of affect things.
And it can potentially negatively influence your ability to do your job properly.
Correct.
You don't want to be on the back foot.
That's right. And also just even circling back to what you were talking about earlier, Phil, in terms of structuring, we have actually, I'd like to share an example. Recently we had a doctor client of ours. Now what they did is he was purchasing a property, a new clinic of his specialised practice area, so a couple of rooms on the 14th floor. So what happened was went to auction one day on the weekend, really liked the property, bought it, I think it was about $2.7 million, did the deal and gave me a call on Monday saying, I've exchanged contracts. And I was like, okay, we'd never really discussed this before. So it was quite sort of impulsive buy of theirs. Got the contract come through from the agent and it's in their personal name, whereas it should have ideally been in a different entity. So I think the beauty with KHI Partners there was their accountant was also another partner at KHI Partners, so Nafis. Again, they hadn't actually discussed this purchase with them. Otherwise, of course, Nafis would have advised them. So what we had to do in that instance was we sort of organised a quick meeting, discussed it through with Nafis, where we were able to sort of change the structure, change the entity, go back to the other side and have everything sort of rectified to make sure it was in the correct entity moving forward, because, of course, that would have caused a lot of problem later on in the
the vendor
future.
was happy to change the contract?
Yeah, look, when it's generally on the same terms, we can speak to the other side. It wasn't necessarily a request that was going to change anything. It was more so just exchanging contracts, rescinding and re-exchanging on the same terms and conditions.
Yeah. The Munzuruls have phone calls from me on a Saturday going, Munzurul, I'm going to buy this. What entity do I buy it in? You go, do this, that.
And we encourage the clients to do that, right? Because once they sign the contract, even though we can go back to the vendor and we can try to negotiate and change it, but the vendor is under no obligation to do that, right? I mean, there is no loss for the vendor to do it, but if you have 1 out of 100 cases saying that, well, we're not doing it, that's where it's sort of stuck, right? So we say that to all of our clients is that speak to us before you make the decision. Phil, the comment which I was going to say is that I say very often the compliance accountant as opposed to a strategic accountant. And there is quite a bit of a difference, right? A strategic accountant is the person who goes a little bit more. And I think that same concept applies to all profession, right? So if we look through from the lawyer side of it, there are compliance lawyers, right? They've got a certain level of instruction. They just do what's being instruction that's in there.
Mm.
The way I see it is a good value from our point of view as a lawyer side of it. Number one is listening to it. And number two is that as long as we inform the client with all the different options, all the pros and cons, and all the different options as such, then we leave it to the client to some extent is to make an informed decision.
In the balance.
Yeah, in the balance. A classic example is that when you're buying it and selling properties, right? So when you're buying a property, you can do a whole lot of searches. So how far do you go to the searches? Now, there are some clients who sort of say, well, I understand we can do all those 15 searches. I'm comfortable with this bare minimum 7. I understand it saves me a bit of cost. I want to go with 7, right? And there are clients who sort of say, no, I want to go through and do all of those 14, 15 of them, even if it costs us. So we leave that to the client to make the decision somewhat, as long as we communicate to the client.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing with lawyers as well, you want a lot of creativity from your lawyers, particularly if you're dealing in sort of less than normal property-related transactions, and creativity is important. And your lawyer's just not acting on your behalf in a bubble of the deal they're working on right now. A really good property lawyer has seen a lot, right? And if they can go back and say, well, I've seen this before and this is how we responded to it, or really good negotiating tactics, or, this is the commerciality of law of, how do you actually negotiate a deal where you might be compromising on certain points to win in other areas as well? And a good lawyer will know those and have seen those. And you want to really draw into that, don't you, Sandy?
That's right, Phil. I think we've seen a lot of issues rise. Michael and I, we see it every day. One of the key things I'd probably like to share with you, given the time of the year, is what we generally see towards the end of the year is land tax issues, implication adjustments, and also the interest rate, what happens if settlement doesn't take place before Christmas, because we've got that 2 or 3 week closure period. Banks are on skeleton staff. It's highly unlikely you're going to be able to get a legal office, contact a legal office or any professional services during that time. They'd most likely be on leave. So there is sort of that Christmas closure period where offices are shut down for those 2-3 weeks, and settlements, anything that doesn't settle by before Christmas rolls over to the next year. With that, obviously, also comes in is the land tax issue. So if the seller is liable for land tax and the purchaser hasn't negotiated out of that requirement for adjustment, then because land tax, as you know, is from the 1st of January to the 31st of December and based on the previous year, what the buyer's done in that instance, if settlement rolls over, is they may be liable for that land tax adjustment, which they may not have budgeted for or accounted for. So that's something I always like to make sure that's in contracts. If I'm acting for a buyer, I negotiate out of that, or I make the client well aware of what that possible land tax may be.
I always, it depends whether a buyer or seller, whether I want to negotiate on that particular point. But so it's really variations, right? So if, sometimes they go, well, I've already paid the land tax for the whole period essentially. So therefore I need to, if you pay, let's use an example in New South Wales. So land tax is based on the property owned on the 31st of December, correct? So let's say 31st of December. So that means in January, that means if you own the property there, if you sell that property in January, you owned it a day before, you're still liable to pay the land tax for the whole period of that year moving forward. So that should really be a deduction off the purchase price, whereas a lot of people don't negotiate on that stuff. It's absolutely madness.
Correct. And again, it depends on which party you're on. Are you acting for the buyer or acting for the seller? And obviously discuss that in the implications with your client. While we are on this topic, I'd like to share an example with you. It was a case matter that we actually had a couple of years back, just during COVID. What happened in that instance was we were acting for a seller. They were selling a block of land about $1.8 million. In southwest Sydney. So what happened there was we were acting for the seller. They had their own project going on. They were building a new family home. So they came to an agreement with the buyer that would like settlement to be at least before Christmas, on the 23rd, have those funds ready so they can go ahead and fund their project for the builds that they were doing. Now, what this buyer was doing is they were also acquiring the block next door because they wanted to do a project of their own. And come time for settlement, something went wrong. They weren't able to get finance approval in time. So they requested an extension. Our client agreed to it. And we charged interest for those 2-3 weeks that they were late. Come time for the new agreed settlement date, again, they weren't able to settle, requested another extension. Now, as the seller, acting for the seller, I advised them of what they can and can't do. my clients had the right to keep the 10% deposit and walk away and go sell the property to another party. But of course, my clients had already contracted into this. They thought it would just be a whole lot easier to get this across the line, obviously help out the buyer as well in this instance, so they can all move along. Again, I think we gave them 2 or 3 extensions, 2-3 months later down the track. They were finally able to settle, but they paid land tax, they paid a lot of interest, and they had to pay on top of the purchase price additional sums, obviously, to compensate my client.
So your client, they owned the property as of 31st December, even though the settlement didn't happen until March or April.
Correct.
So you got them you got the buyer you got a variation for the buyer to pay the land tax and everything else connected with it. Yeah.
So what I had done in that instance is actually negotiated the special conditions. The other side asked for the land tax adjustment to be removed. So I agreed to remove that subject to settlement taking place before the 31st of December.
Very good.
So once it rolled over, obviously my client was not liable.
And this
for
is
that.
negotiation, right? Like
Correct.
I will give you this on this basis, right?
That's right.
And see, that land tax by itself, it also depends on state by state, right? While we're saying 31st of December, that's all in New South Wales.
Yeah.
Then when we look into Queensland as an example, we say 30th of June, right? So it's about having that bit of the knowledge. And
So Queensland land tax is property owned as of the 30th of June, is it?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah,
Whereas
just,
New
I
South
get stuff coming all the time. I just go, why can't this is my one bugbear. Universal property legislation Australia wide would be really handy. It'd probably put you guys out of a job, but it'd be a lot easier for everyone.
There's a bit of a history, right? And the history sort of goes back because Australia, that's 6 states and 2 territories, is that if we look back to the older Commonwealth law and the legislation where the legislation came in, it was an individual state by legislation in most of it, right? You've got, of course, the federal legislation, but individual. And so that's one comment with the land tax side of it. The second comment, which I also wanted to say, is that if the land tax you do not negotiate, then it passes back to the buyer, right, during that process. And there are a number of expenses, right? Council rate, water rates, all of those things is that if they do not get negotiated, do not get adjusted, then the buyer sort of takes that responsibility. I had this one example many years ago, is that there was a significant level of council rate which was outstanding from the seller's perspective. My solicitor at that stage missed, and it went through the whole thing and everything came back to myself, right? And I was legally liable in terms of that council rate. We negotiated ourselves out of it after the settlement, but if the seller were adamant, then I would have very small standing.
Well, I did a transaction about this time last year of a property I secured in New South Wales, and I negotiated a extended settlement. I can't remember the reason why I used it, to put it into the next calendar year. So I didn't have to pay the stamp duty because the transaction could have taken place in December, but I pushed it to January, so I didn't want to be owning that property as of 31st of December. Yeah,
this is where it's so important that where it is, we all work together as a team, the lawyers and the accountants and the financial planners and so forth, right? All that settlement is that if I bring in the tax side of it now, it depends on who the owner is. If it's an individual is the owner, then it's all about when the contract was unconditionally exchanged. That's where you've got the CGT.
Yeah.
But when it starts going into that trust and the corporate entities, then it goes back into the settlement. So sometimes that bit of that sophistication of the knowledge,
it all sort of comes in. Yeah. It's interesting. It's really, really interesting if you get stuck into it. But so you guys like law? It's your call. Is it a calling? Is it something you'll stick with? You think? Michael?
I mean, look, I can't see myself doing anything else.
No.
I enjoy, as Munzurul puts it, contributing to people's lives.
Yeah.
That is a calling for myself. I do enjoy it. I do see. I do like being a part of a team where we can strategize and focus and get the client to achieve the dreams that they're after with and through property. And then obviously providing them the advice. There's a lot of other things that we can help with or benefit with. We touched on a few things today, and that's a really, really good positive thing that we can help with. And it really helps when our office is designed in a way where you go in and the client can see all their services in a couple of hours, right? Whereas in the outside world, you may need 3 or 4 months worth of meetings and cancelling meetings to just set up an appointment with your accountant to speak with your lawyer to speak with their mortgage broker. So we do cut off a lot of lead time, a lot of wait time when we're all working together on the matter.
And you guys get involved in the DD connected with property transactions. Like, we're not just talking about the creation of legal documents. You actually get involved in ensuring the integrity of a potential purchase.
Yeah, we do. So we do all our searches for the property before cooling off, before the client goes unconditional into the contract. So whether that be pest and building inspection, strata inspection, ensuring the client has finance approval. We don't let clients go into the contract unconditional unless we physically see a copy of their finance approval.
And do you go into the details around the assessment of property, whether it's in flood-prone areas, or you do all that sort of stuff? Yeah.
Yes, we do. So we do all those pre-property investment searches, make sure it's all good, the client knows what they're doing. And of course, we also have a meeting with the client just to understand what their plans are in the long term. Are they planning to build a granny flat on the property? Are they planning to do something that they need to perhaps?
So you can do those assessments on sort of development viability for the future and do all those sort of things?
So we can advise on the contract and what, the 10.7, the council planning certificate would be, what zone it is in, and what sort of conditions apply to the property. Then, of course, we would ask them to go speak to the specialist advisor, whether that be the council, town planner, the surveyor, just to get more information as to what their plan is with the property or development, so they can have that sort of knowledge before they go unconditional on the contract.
Okay. There you go, Munzurul.
Very good.
Yeah, pretty smart outfit you got here.
Very blessed.
Do you use these guys for your conveyancing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, wholeheartedly. I mean, Michael has done a number of transactions. You've done a number of transactions, and you both combined a number of transactions, both in terms of conveyancing as well as the business purchase side of it,
Yeah, which is a whole other aspect of it all.
Absolutely.
The DD around business purchasing and growth, which I know you're sort of really involved in. But I've really enjoyed catching up. It's just a sage reminder of just the complexity or interconnectivity of all these different relationships you have if you're serious about wealth creation through property. You need a really good relationship with an accountant and a lawyer and a financial advisor and your mortgage broker and your insurer. So this is what we're chatting about in the balance. It's a good thing with KHI is that it's all in one place. That's handy, I imagine.
We're very, very blessed because all those different level of services that we have, and just with the lawyer side of it is that we also look into the estate planning quite a bit.
Yeah, okay.
So estate planning is a whole bunch of a sort of an area, right? And very often when we look into the estate planning, we say that, well, is it a will? Is it something that you just download? It's just so much deeper than a will, right?
Yeah, a lot of people get hesitant around estate planning. Estate planning starts when you start investing. And this is like a lot of people think estate planning is, well, wills and all that sort of stuff. But it's how you buy and hold property through that whole process of maybe decades as a property investor will fundamentally shape your estate planning, right? You want to get it right at the front end, but what you don't know at the front end, like I don't know, many people go, I'm going to end up with a massive property portfolio. I'm going to buy one or two properties. I don't need to worry too much about it. But the other side is that some people really over-engineer it too early on in the process, right? You need good advice around it.
Yeah, you got to have that balance, and I agree with that. You got to have balance, right? But the estate planning is just so much deeper than just sort of having the will, right? So whether it's your enduring guardianship, whether it's a power of attorney, whether it is a testamentary trust, and particularly the testamentary trust has got so much tax benefits, so much asset protection, so much flexibility, right? So at a bare minimum, our role is that we communicate all of those. Right? In our side of the service side of it, we never try to sort of sell anything. As long as we have communicated that, yes, these are all the estate planning, these are all the things. And then it goes even at more sort of a minute level. So my example is that I've got a whole bunch of trust and I've got a whole bunch of trustee companies. There was a point of time that I realized is that I'm the sole director on every one of those trustee company, and I was also being the sole appointer. So on that example, Michael, is that if I'm not around, and I do not have an appointer to change anything on the trustee side of it. And because I was the sole director and sole shareholder, that means everything was with myself. So the trust was almost going to be on sort of a private nightmare. It would be
it's a large exercise, I'll tell you that.
It's a large exercise. And all I had to do is just engage and include Proby as either being a shareholder or a directorship role, or even better, as a co-appointer role. And many of the trustee it allows you to appoint another appointer.
And that's really good. And again, you need to look, I don't want to sort of quickly gleam over it, but there's positive and negatives of having multiple directors, right? If you've got multiple directors, you're doing a lot of trust-based lending, means you've got to get two signatures and everything, like, horses for courses. Again, you need really good advice, and that would be a good conversation to be having with your lawyer and your accountant, I would imagine, sort of simultaneously. It's probably pretty important. But so who you got for us next, Munzurul? So we've had now lawyers. What else you going to?
We'll bring in Gary next. Gary is our CFO, and Gary does with many, many very large clients, and Gary looks after their whole sort of the internal accounting system. And Gary is that we look into the open world, and I say that there is a portfolio that I look after with the clients and some of the larger clients, and it's Gary is the man who does many of those things on the background. So I'm looking forward to Gary.
Are most of your, generalising, but are most people attracted to KHI business owners with business assets and then also real estate assets? Is that like a common general sort of client for you?
It's quite interesting because we look back to KHI and we sort of say that we've been around about 15, 16 years, right? So many of our clients are being with us for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years and all the rest of it. And it's amazing to go through the journey with those clients. So many of our very, very large clients, they were 10, 15 years ago, were very beginning clients. Right, they could have been just mom and dad sort of clients, but I look back to those clients and they've got multiple trusts, they've got self-managed super fund, they've got multiple investment, and they also have multiple different businesses, right? Some of my very, very large clients in day one, they were just absolutely beginning. So we look after all. So property investors are the clients that we tend to sort of attract quite a bit, but we've got some very large business group that we look after, very large. And when we say very large, I've got a number of clients over $100 million top line revenue, and I've got a number of clients where property doesn't come into account at all.
Okay, just all business. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, there you go. You must get frustrated with them games. Probably better. No, it's good. So there's always capacity to work with more people with KHI Munzurul. How do people find you and chat with you? And
absolutely. In our website and the admin at khipartners.com.au or hello@khipartners.com.au.
Yep.
And with the phone call based on the service that they need, we've got all of those different services.
That's all there. Okay, nice one. Well, thanks for bringing Michael and Sandy in. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you for having
us.
us.
For a chat and spending a good hour on the In the Balance podcast. Keep tuning in, everyone. Some of you still might be on holidays waiting for Australia to come around the corner, so you can binge on a whole bunch of different podcasts we've been recording for this. I look forward to Gary in the studio next month. We can chat through all those sort of stuff, and then also the insurance side of things. And then what will come next? We'll work that out, Munzurul. It's always good. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you again next time. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.